intro is gonna play for like 45 seconds.
Hey, Omar,
What's
can
up?
I eat on this podcast?
Do whatever you want, Peter. I mean,
I don't know. That's weird.
you're the producer. Whatever you feel like you want to do, brother.
I just saw the countdown and Peter's like, oh God.
That'd be kind of funny, right? I'm just like, fucking.
You got my green tea. And welcome everybody to the Only Difference Is You show. Today we have Amar Ghose. I probably butchered your name. Why don't you help me pronounce that, brother?
It's pronounced Gauche. It's one of those.
Gauche. All right.
Yeah.
I was close, but I
gotten out on the
totally
first
butchered
try?
it either way. Well, it's the A meets the O. Mars today. We got Amar and we got Omar, and I wish we worked at the same company because, man, that would just be awesome.
Yeah.
Just to let the audience know, I am kind of just meeting Amar for the first time. I know Peter and Amar go way back. How far back? I don't know. Why don't Peter, after you're done with your mouthful, and maybe Amar, you can go first and just introduce yourself while Peter swallows whatever he's got in his mouth.
Yeah. I'll let Peter talk about how we know each other and everything. But yeah, just in a nutshell, like I'm Amar. I guess when I'm on like podcasts like this, I'm typically on because I've been doing like the digital nomad thing for a couple of years. We met back in Orange County. I was working a tech sales job like back there, and moved back up to the Bay Area. Started my own company that we bootstrapped, no funding, anything like that, and that was back in 2013. And so in 2015, after working full time for like a couple of years and doing that as a side project, I started traveling the world. And so I've been doing that since 2015. And in early 2021, I'll be settling down in Thailand for the foreseeable future. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, I guess. I don't know.
That's great, man. That's really awesome. I couldn't ask for more of a great summary. It give me some information so that I can kind of springboard off of. Tell us what was that bootstrap company that you built in 2013? I'm curious.
So that's ZenMaid.com, ZNMAID. It's a scheduling software for maid services. So every maid service has to manage their calendar. They have to know like where they have to be and when. So a lot of maid services will be using, pen and paper or Google Calendar or whatever, and we just have a much more specialized version of that adds on some automations and stuff like that.
Great. And is that company still going? Did you sell the company? What's going on with ZenMaid?
Yes, still going. We just broke in October. It took a long time to really build that up. Like 3, even 4 years in, it didn't really look like it was financially worth it. That like the big reason that I actually started traveling the world was to actually lower my expenses. That a lot of people think traveling the world is really expensive, but you go to Thailand and you can comfortably live on $700-800 a month. And so that was like the big reason that I finally made the jump and like went over there. But yeah, I think in October we just broke like the $1 million annual recurring revenue mark.
Wow.
So yeah, it's still going strong.
That's amazing, and thanks for just kind of taking us behind the scenes and just sharing a little bit. I think that's very admirable as far as what an entrepreneur is willing to do for his own company, literally being a nomad so that your company can survive. Now, how big or how little of an impact do you think that was for your company's survival? And furthermore, would you recommend that to others or not?
I think it probably depends a lot on like your kind of like your risk profile, on how like risk averse you are, as well as like your fallback options. So a great book, the big like classic, is the 4-Hour Work Week. And if you read that, one of the biggest takeaways that I had from that book was talking about like worst case scenario planning. And so for me, I was miserable at my day job. I was
Mm-hmm.
commuting back and forth to San Francisco, where I was spending about 3 hours a day just getting to and from work in like
Mm-hmm.
both directions. And so for me, it was kind of a sanity thing that I think that if I hadn't gone full time, made the jump and gone abroad to like lower my expenses,
Mm-hmm.
I probably would have like jumped off like a bridge at some point, right? Like
I
I
hear
was
you,
just
man.
completely miserable and like
Dude.
unhappy.
Yeah.
um, and but yeah, I mean, honestly, it was very much like the key thing is like I went full time on it. It still wasn't doing great, but there was a lot of potential there, and being able to focus on it full time. I mean, it literally would have taken me another 3 years. You know, it would have taken me until 2018 working on it as a side project for me to have even considered trying to go full time on it and continuing to live
I see.
where I did. Yeah, I mean, sometime in 2019, I started actually paying myself more money from the company than I was earning in San Francisco. So, like,
Gotcha.
it would have taken a
Wow.
long time.
Mm.
So,
Um,
no, I mean, that's a beautiful answer. I think if I was to summarize it, you would pretty much be saying, how bad do you want it? Pretty much to any
yeah,
young hustlers, right? If if you're willing to wait, if you're willing to treat it as a side hustle, sure. But if you want to make it happen, that's pretty much what you have to be willing to do. Is what you've done, Amar. Is all right. Well, if you really want to save those costs and make your nut as low as possible, so to speak, you got to be willing to do those kind of things and give up what it means to travel the world, right? That really means that your relationships have to be dynamic and mobile, right? Nothing, or at
yeah,
least you have to detach yourself from any kind of physical things. As far
yeah.
as being, I come from the poker world, man, so I know quite a few people that have actually moved to Mexico and Thailand to be able to play online poker. So, I mean, as far as me being able to do that, no, I don't think I could. I'm tied here to Los Angeles for a couple reasons. So when I hear that kind of story, I'm just impressed and amazed, and you're right in the middle of it, man. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really cool story that you're right in the middle of telling, actually. Um,
Yeah, couple of things there, just really,
yeah,
really quickly.
sure,
So
yeah.
one thing that I really want to like emphasize here is like I think it's more just that everyone has to find their own path, and there's like different ways of doing it. There's different ways of accomplishing it. But
Mm-hmm.
the way that I think about it is just like if you want if you want to be able to do things that other people can't do, you have to be willing to do things that other people like don't do, right? Or won't do or whatever. And so it's more of just thinking of it in
Solid.
terms of like sacrifice, right? Of just like you can't have like I mean essentially you can have anything that you want in the world, but you can't have everything that you want in
Mm-hmm.
the world, right? And so for me, I just made a couple of very specific decisions that gave me the best like kind of opportunity and kind of fit where I was at that time in my life. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a lot of people that it's a much better idea for them to stay at their day job and to do the side hustle. And so the one thing I just want to like point out there is like I don't think it's necessarily if you're not willing to like quit and to go full time and you don't want to take on that risk. I don't think that means that like you necessarily don't want it. It's just more like you have to realize that okay, by making that decision and playing it a little bit safer, it's going to take you longer to get to your goals. It may introduce risk in other ways, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just simply a decision, and every decision has consequences, right?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, Omar, that I just wanted to touch on just really quickly because it's interesting that you brought it up. So
Mm-hmm.
when I read the 4-Hour Work Week, I
Mm-hmm.
read it back in 2007 when it first
Mm-hmm.
came out,
Mm-hmm.
and I was playing poker competitively online. And
Mm.
so it's the
Nice.
exact
Wow.
same story for you. That the big, not even like the big difference, but when I read that book, I had friends that were online that I would talk to on like the 2+2 forums
Yeah.
and like the different forums like online. And I had friends that were actually living the digital nomad lifestyle. And so when I initially read that book, book, you know, a lot of my friends read it at the same time and they were like, oh yeah, that sounds cool, but like I couldn't do that, or it's not for me.
Yeah.
And for me, I was like, no, I can totally do that. I have friends that are totally doing that, like, you know, I'm better at it than like in, you know, in poker or whatever. And so I had that sort of like core belief that I could actually like live this lifestyle. It just took me, you know, 8 or 9 years after reading that book to finally like actually leave the US and do all of that stuff. But yeah, same sort of background and like story there.
So
That's what led me
it
into
wasn't
it.
like a totally weird idea. You're like, okay, I was already thinking about that, but you know, this book just kind of makes it concrete for me, right?
Yeah, well, I had never really considered it in terms of like doing like the Nomad thing or being abroad, but like as soon as I read the book, it put it into perspective. I was like, oh, that's what Steve is doing. Like, you know, I'd always thought it was weird that he was living in Costa Rica, and then I read this book. I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, okay.
You know?
So that's weird because I mean, I guess I would call myself old school, if you can say old school, as in like I read it probably in 2008-ish, right after the book came out. So
Yeah.
and then when and people back then were because I think part of the book is a little bit figurative in that, like, who can really shrink 40 hours down to 4? I mean, if you get halfway there, great, right? But in that, like, after I read that book, I was hardcore like, all right, fuck 40 hours, I'm working 4 hours a week. And then that was what really like I literally took his book literally, like. And then I had like my partner and other people would be like, Omar, he wasn't being serious in that book. And I'm like, no, I think he was. So from 11 years ago or 12 years ago, when I first read the book, I'm still in the process of literally creating that 4-hour work week, and everyone in my life being like, no, you're retarded. He was not being serious. And I'm like, no, I think he was being literal in 4 hours. And so for the last decade of my life is like still trying to get there. Started, failed at least a couple businesses, many more stupid side hustles, but that book is kind of what started it all for me. It's like, all right, man, this guy did it. All right, I'm on my way there. And a lot of the same concepts and even the same programs are the ones that I use today. For example, I think it was that book that introduced me to 99 Designs. And Peter popped out of here, so I'm going to have to readjust our view here, which is fine. Peter, you still there? No, Peter's gone. All right. Well, if he pops on, it'll just be his audio. It's all good.
All right.
Well, you know, when I know Peter introduced us, Amar, but when I looked on our friends list, we have like some mutual contacts from like probably different marketing groups and stuff. So I imagine, you know, I call myself a troll in the most liberal sense, in that like I'm like trolling all over the internet and things that I'm interested in. Like I've trolled spiritual forums, religious forums, marketing forums. So I think that maybe some other traffic and funnel or web copy kind of we're in some mutual groups. Can you tell us about your marketing path? You're obviously really good at marketing. Otherwise, you know, your companies wouldn't have succeeded. Can you tell us your path there? Where'd your marketing journey start? Where is it now?
Yeah. So what's interesting is, so when we were starting ZenMaid, it was essentially that I had like the sales background. I'd actually run my own maid service before as well. And so when we started ZenMaid, my co-founder Arun, he was like, I can build this product if you can go out and sell it. And then he was very confident in my ability to learn how to market. And so what was really interesting was that the more that I got into marketing, the more that I realized that that's actually what I was passionate about. That like I knew that I didn't actually like doing sales, but I was just like, okay, like if I can sell my own product, I obviously make a much better margin than if I'm selling someone else's product. So like if I'm going to use that skill set, it might as well be for my own benefit. But the more that I learned about it, the more that I really began to enjoy marketing. So when we started the company, I had no background at all in marketing. I had almost no experience in marketing. You know, hadn't been particularly effective as a marketer, you know, when I had like my maid service before that and everything. And since then, I've gone through and I'm very much just, self-taught, right? That I taught myself copy. I learned Facebook ads, Google ads. I've pretty much done everything in the company on the marketing side from like the ground up. And now I'm surrounded by a great team that does most of the stuff. So I just kind of get to come up with the big ideas and everything. But yeah, lots of courses, lots of just throwing things up on the wall and seeing what sticks. They're very much learning by doing.
Gotcha. And I think that's really interesting. Could you talk more about having your own made business first? So it seems like, all right, you kind of had it like in one vertical sector first, and then the idea to, let's go everywhere with the software side of things. How did one turn into the other?
So I started my maid service after reading a thread on Reddit from a guy that was starting his own maid service and was essentially just logging the entire process. So I started a maid service following that, and I did that actually with Peter. I don't remember if you remember Darren from Orange County, but he was my business partner. We ran in the same circles back in the day. Darren Jack.
No,
Remember
I don't
him?
remember.
No. Okay.
No.
Yeah, he was one of my friends from the Bay Area that moved down to Orange County, and he was there for maybe a year or two. So we ended up partnering on that. We ended up going our own separate ways when I moved out of Orange County and moved back to San Francisco for my day job. He wasn't comfortable with me running the maid service remotely, even though we had set it up to actually be able to run remotely. In the year that we were running it, I think I'd met one client in person and one set of cleaners in person, and the rest of the time everything was done virtually. But he still wasn't comfortable with that, and so I moved back up there, and then my friend Arun approached me at some point and was just like, hey, I think we should think about starting a software company. And what's interesting with that is that we actually looked into quite a few ideas, and we even did customer development in quite a few different industries before going back to the maid service industry. That we were concerned that with my experience in the maid service industry, that it would be a bit of a crutch, that it would actually make it it might seem like we would have initial traction, but then it would actually be really difficult to sort of scale from there and everything. And then when we finally went back to it, we sort of got to it, and that was a big challenge for us, right? It was initially I could get a lot of people on the phone by just saying that I also ran my own maid service, and then as soon as we had to sort of get past that point where we had to start actually marketing to 5 or 10 people at a time, then people cared about that a lot less, and so that was another hurdle that we had to do.
What a interesting story to go to the beginning of your book, is you're probably in the middle of the end book, right? The beginning of the company is, well, we actually explored many other sectors, but we went back to the maid service. Now, can you talk to us about that? I think that's amazing that you even recognize what a potential strength could be, a weakness at the beginning, right? All right, Amar's got all these relationships, could, get the revenue, but you also were like, well, let's back off a bit and just think, is this good for the bigger picture? I think wow, when can a business and founder step back and actually do that? I think that's amazing. And what other industries did you explore, and which ones did you say nah before you came back to the maid and the cleaning industry?
Yeah, so we just we tried to reach out to dentists and lawyers and stuff like that. That we were still looking for kind of a local kind of service business type that we were hoping would pay us better margins and everything. That ZenMaid customers pay us anywhere from 50 to maybe $250 a month. I think we have one customer that pays us 500. If you work with dentists or anyone in a medical sort of field, you can easily be charging $500 a month or more. Honestly, we just didn't really get much traction. People didn't really respond to us all that well, and all that, and so we struggled with that. And then as soon as we went back to the maid services, then it got a lot easier and everything. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It was yeah, it was a challenge. It was an uphill battle in the beginning.
So
Well, I mean, it was an uphill battle for the first like 6 years.
of course. I mean, when is it not an uphill
Too
battle? You know, unless you're Google and you have a monopoly, right? But so for us little guys, it's always an uphill battle. Now I'm so interested in a how you took a obvious strength and actually been like, well, how could this be a crutch, a weakness? But let's talk about the strength, right? You having running a cleaning business, you know the pain points of where the software can come in, right? So let's talk about that. Where did you see the software solving a problem that not only you, but all your other friends and competitors in the same horizontal are experiencing? What is that problem, that itch that you're trying to scratch?
So, I mean, it's funny because it's like, you know, how like your strengths become your weaknesses, and
Yeah,
sometimes your weaknesses become like your strengths, and that's
definitely.
kind of like everyone has to know themselves and
Mm-hmm.
figure out, you know, how are they gonna like sort of like come together and everything. And so, one of my biggest like traits is that I'm actually quite lazy. That I'm not actually like
Same. Yeah.
a very like hard worker,
Me
right?
too.
Um,
Yeah.
but it that can actually play to your benefit if you're still focused on like the job at hand. So like what I always say is like I hate doing things, but I love getting things done.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's kind of like the balance that I've like that I've found. And so when it came to starting the actual maid service, I was like the one who was actually dealing with the clients, dealing with the cleaners, doing all of the scheduling, but I was working a full-time job, and so I couldn't really answer phone calls. I pretty much only had a little bit of time at the beginning of the day before heading into work, and then my lunch hour, and then after work to actually work on the maid service. And so because of that, we tried to automate as many things as possible. So before ZenMaid, there weren't really any softwares that were out there that were really focused on kind of the communication aspect of working with clients and cleaners. And so like they would have that sort of functionality, but it wasn't like a primary feature. And so what we did is we came in, and when we designed like our own website that did all of this stuff for us. So someone would come on, they would book automatically on our website, they would get a quote, they would like confirm their booking, choose their time, all of that. And then I would get a notification, and all that I had to do was go, okay, this is the person that we're going to assign to this cleaning. And then that person would immediately get notified that they now have this cleaning on their calendar for 2 p.m.
Gotcha.
Right. And so then our system would send a confirmation to the actual cleaning client. It would send a reminder to them. It would send an automatic follow-up, all of those things. And so what we did was we essentially designed it to the point where I could get on to essentially a website 3 times a day and be mainly running the maid service. It's like that was like 80 to like 90% of my job, and it was only if things went wrong that that like I would really have to like to step in and like and do anything. And so that was like the core concept that we tried to build into ZenMaid. And in a lot of ways that was pretty much what we launched with. Like we launched with essentially an ultra basic calendar that just sent the exact reminders and the exact notifications that almost every maid service should be sending, or we're already sending, but we're sending manually.
Gotcha. And I mean, I think the amazing thread is I've heard this. It was either like some genius guy like Steve Jobs or Albert Einstein, or someone had connected the laziness to a really good founder. Is that like it's generally like the quote unquote laziest people that start the most amazing companies, because they end up automating the things that nobody else thought to automate before, you know. And it's funny, but it's kind of true, right? You have the hustle mentality, right? But you have that inner drive to like not want to do anything. So it's it could actually be like beneficial that you had that day job when you started it, because it forced you to automate things to make it actually a functional business. So I think that's a really amazing theme to touch on. You kind of find that one of the founders has that inherent laziness that like, no, I don't want to do all this work. How can we batch it? How can we automate it? How can we get a robot to do the majority of these things, right? I think that's beautiful. Now let's backtrack a little bit more, Amar. I don't think that you talked about why cleaning in the first place. Why did you even start the cleaning business to begin with before the software?
So it was just that I came across that thread on
that's
Reddit,
right, the Reddit
that I'd mentioned, but the whole thing was like I was just looking for like I'd always been looking for like various kind of side projects, right? That after reading the 4-Hour Workweek, I knew that like I wanted to be running like my own thing and just be making money outside of a day job. That just like the idea of trading time for money just never really appealed. So I was always kind of on the lookout for those things. And so at that, it was just like good timing that, I was kind of in between little like side projects. I wasn't so happy at my day job, came across that thread, and then me and a friend just decided to pull the trigger on it and do that.
Gotcha. And the rest is history. I think that's a beautiful story because, and like Peter's actually the one, I know Peter didn't make up this quote, but he said, you can only connect the dots in hindsight, right? But it's really interesting. Like if we, stretch your path, it all seems obvious, but the decision at that point, to me, it seems really random. That's why I'm asking you, like, why cleaning and not any other industry, right? Like, I'm just going to throw out some things. Did it seem like low hanging fruit, like an industry that not a lot of people are looking at? Because it's just one of those maybe blue collar type of work, and it's not one that I for example, like real estate, a lot of people are trying to tackle the real estate listing stuff, and maybe just not a lot of people are going after cleaning. Like what made it after you read that Reddit post, what jumped out and made it seem like such a good opportunity for the other ones that you were considering at the time?
Well, do you mean for the actual software, or do you mean for like,
no, just for the business that you started, right? Like you seem like a guy that could be successful doing many things, or were you just trying a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then seeing kind of what's stuck on the wall?
Yeah. Well, so that's another one that like in hindsight I could like make something up, but the truth is I didn't consider anything else. There was nothing else. Like it was just something that like I was just looking for kind of action to take, and like having a bias towards action I think is like a big thing that's helped me get to where I am. And like even a couple of years ago, I would say if I was going to restart something, it would probably just be kind of like whatever opportunity would come in front of me that like I thought was interesting or might work, then I would just try it to just sort of move forward with it. Like now I'm at the point where, the next business that I'm going to do is going to be something that I'm going to take a look at a lot of the numbers, look at other opportunities, figure out what I actually want to move forward with and everything. There was none of that for a maid service. Like it was none of that. It was literally as simple as like one guy was just laying out how he was going to start a maid service, and he was going to do it through digital marketing and without doing any of the cleaning himself. And I just looked at that and I was like, I think that we can do that. I think that we can make that like successful, or like it's worth trying. Right. And that was it. Right. There was nothing else that was considered.
That boys and girls at home, don't think that useless Reddit trolling is no good. Go spend your time on Reddit. You might find your next $1 billion idea. All right.
Yeah.
Just keep trolling Reddit. You might meet your future co-founder on Reddit. There you go. No, that's a beautiful story, man. And I'm glad I kept pushing you with questions, because you I don't know if this is in a book or whatever, but the whole bias towards action, I think that's a beautiful phrase that I'm going to use that after today, is that it's for someone like me, that's meaningful, right? Because I'm the kind of guy that will come up with 10,000 dime a dozen ideas and not take action on anything. I don't know if you kind of vacillate back and forth, or you've always been just like, let's just do something. And then I could use a little bit more of that action in my life. The bias towards action is that like you could think of an idea all day long, but you don't really get in anywhere unless you take some action steps. And I think that's important. That's an important lesson for any entrepreneurs. How has that theme kind of fit into your life, and do you still kind of go by that today in terms of your daily business?
I think it goes in cycles, at least for me, that I had a long time where I was much more like talk than walk, right? That I was like much more, talking about all the ideas that I would do, but then I wouldn't take action. And so then at some point I went through like a phase, where I just like stopped talking about what I was doing and I was just like, all right, like action is just going to do the talking here, right? But like that's not actually sustainable. Anyone that just goes, oh, like if you just do the work, then people will recognize you. It's like, yeah, but you still have to get lucky at some point and someone has to recognize your work and then they have to do the talking. And so now it's like kind of like a balance for me. But I had a lot of time where I would just be going through different ideas. I would talk about all the things that I was going to do, but then it would never actually materialize and never actually happen. And so then at some point I was like, all right, it's time to just like move forward on stuff. And I also think that when you have that bias towards action, it accelerates your learning. And so like if you're someone that's maybe stuck and isn't happy with like sort of the results that they're getting in life, having a bias towards action will likely change that. But then there will be a point in time where if you have too strong of a bias towards action, then you begin to bite off more than you can chew. And so I'm in that like position now where like I just like bought another software company in June because things were just sort of low in ZenMaid and like, with COVID going on, I just like felt like I had all this time on my hands. And that was very much a bias towards action, right? If I was just like, oh, I saw this opportunity, I think it's like a good company. We use a tool that's like this. And so I like just made it happen, put together a couple $1,000, like $20,000 and like bought like this company. But like now that I've bought it, now like I've realized that like actually the amount of like effort that we have to put in to get it from like where it is to where we want it to be is just a massive distraction when we also have ZenMaid that's growing at a very fast pace and all of that stuff. And so that's some place where like the bias towards action kind of bit me in the ass a little bit. At the same time, though, I learned a ton and I know exactly why this was the wrong purchase to make. So I'm likely going to resell it, take like, a decent like loss on it or whatever, but I'm much more informed for like the next sort of like company that I'm going to move forward with. Right. And I don't plan on starting another one. I plan on buying like the next company and then like scaling it rather than trying to go from zero to whatever.
And I mean, talk about like taking a haircut, having to sell, but I mean, in what market can you like buy an entire company for $20,000, or was this just the loan amount, or what are we talking about here?
Well, so it's more like buying like maybe it's a bit generous to call it like a company, right? But like I essentially bought like a working software product. Right, that like the developer had built it. He wasn't really like he'd built it 3 or 4 years ago.
Gotcha.
Wasn't doing anything with it. Yeah, he'd had customers in the past, but they had like all like stopped using it like over time, even though he had a working product. And I just came in, dropped him a message, and he was just like, yeah, like I spent about $20,000 like developing this just like out of my own time. If you want to, if you want to pay that, you can just buy that. And yeah, but one thing I would like note there is like you can buy companies for a lot less than you would like think. And like the other thing there is like I didn't have $20,000 when I bought this, right? Like I had to go to a couple people, I had to negotiate with him so we could make it in 2 installments so that I could use a couple of paychecks to actually pay it off. But it was another one of those ones where I just believed that it was possible and was like, I want to buy this, I'm going to find a way. And that's exactly what happened. So
that's a great story too, man. Thanks for just being open and willing to share some of the behind the scenes here. I'm really curious. Was this you live in the U.S. or your citizenship is in the U.S. I imagine, right? Was this business entity or person located in the U.S. or was it like an overseas transaction?
No, in the U.S. as well.
Okay.
We just did a bank transfer.
Gotcha.
Like
it makes it a
Chase.
little bit easier. Not that you'd be opposed to like a foreign, but that's totally possible when you're dealing with software and things like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it depends on like how far along you are, because like he wasn't actually like incorporated. So really like I bought the website, the code base,
Yeah.
right, and like a couple other assets like the Twitter account and stuff, you know, that like we didn't have to do any legal paperwork for it
I
or
gotcha.
anything, right? It was just like a transfer.
Well, that's got to be a different kind of valuation in terms of, you know, you could evaluate it as its business, but if you're using the tools internally, then it's a different valuation, right? Because it's worth something to you internally. So it doesn't have to be a profitable company ever for it to be useful for you guys, I imagine. Well, at least at the time that you bought it.
Yeah, we use one of their competitors actually, which I tried to buy the competitor that we use, and they just quoted me a ridiculous amount of money for how much they were actually making. So I went out to their competitors and then found this one to buy instead. But you know, it was a good learning experience, right? Like we're gonna take a loss on it, and like in hindsight, I wouldn't have bought it, but I also like that hindsight, like, you know, clarity is because I made that decision and actually learned from it. So,
Right.
you know,
No,
it is what it is.
I do know, man, because now think about this, because and Peter's forced me to think about some of these things too by forcing that hindsight question, is that like, yeah, right, you could say, okay, well, I wouldn't have done this, but would you really have changed things? Because you're sitting today, right, a more intelligent guy, a more informed man because of that decision. So would you trade that experience, right? So sometimes it's like, nah, man, I just do it exactly as I would have done it, and I'm cool where I'm at now, right?
Yeah. And it's the other thing is like, one thing that I think a lot of people struggle with, and maybe you have to like, I think this is what kind of makes like entrepreneurs a little bit different, is just like looking at risk and perspective in different ways, is like, it's perfectly okay to be like, that was a mistake and it's a mistake that I would make again, right? Or like, if I could do it all over again, like I would still make that mistake based on like the information. Maybe like, I guess actually, so for you with your background in poker, is like, this is one of those things that I feel like a lot of like, I don't know, just like regular people don't really understand
right. I
this
know
much.
where you're
like,
going with this. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, you have pocket aces. You've got to put your money in because you're statistically ahead. And just because you lose with that hand doesn't mean that you made a wrong decision. It doesn't mean that you like made a mistake or that you set your money on fire. It's like, no, I put my money in while I was ahead and it didn't work out for me this time, right? And so that's like the sort of thing, you know, that I look at like with this, is like, this is something that, you know, I spent $20,000, and like the truth is it had a lot of upside. You know, it had the potential that it could have been like a lot more. There are a couple factors that I wasn't aware of, you know, that like maybe I should have been, but now I am. And maybe that changes, you know, the play that I make like the next time, right? Or maybe I just do it exactly the same and see if it works out differently. So
No, I think that I'm so glad that you brought poker into the example, and that I'm talking to someone that will understand a poker analogy, because I want to bring up an analogy to kind of go off that point, in that like, most people can understand the aces example, right? Because it makes sense, right? The one that and I'm a big Doug Polk fanboy. I don't know if Doug Polk is a family name to the audience, but Doug Polk, actually he was off the scene for 2 or 3 years. His coaching company Upswing might be more familiar, but he just recently challenged Daniel Negreanu to a heads-up battle. They're right in the middle of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Doug Polk was like heads-up champion back in 2017. Then he kind of retired from poker, but he came back in, and him and Daniel Negreanu are doing this heads-up battle. But long story short, man, from Doug Polk, right? If anyone watches his training videos or just his real surface level YouTube stuff, like he'll say things like, yeah, you have to call that river even though you lost this hand. Or for example, like he'll be reviewing some hand that some pro played online, and he'll say, yeah, they should have called the river even though they lost. You have to call the river like 50% of the time with that particular hand. And most people are like, are you crazy? Like, that's a stupid hand to call. Like, why would you call with ace high or something like that? And then the theory is that, well, if you always fold, your opponent knows you always fold in that spot. And so you have to call at least some percentages of the time with some mediocre hand on the river, which is why you can justify, right, calling off with fucking ace high, and the other person shows up with the nuts, and then you have Doug Polk saying here, well, hey man, it's a mistake, but it's a mistake I would keep making 25% of the time. Right. So, and that, to really drive home that point for anyone that even knows half of what we're talking about. But no, I love that I can connect poker with you. It's really, really cool. It's not every day that you meet an entrepreneur that's also a former poker player.
Honestly, it's played a huge part in my entrepreneurial journey, particularly from the mindset perspective, because like I've had days where I've lost 2-3 months of rent in a single day, like playing poker. And like when I'm used to that, a lot of my team members, they don't understand how I remain calm, particularly when things don't go like our way. And I'm just like, things aren't going our way, so like we're not going to grow for a week. Like, you have no idea what it's like to like lose your livelihood after like spending a bunch of, this is nothing compared to like the emotional swings I went through with poker.
I hear you, man. It sounds like you got pretty good. What's your history with poker, at least? Like, when did you start, or what level did you get to? Did you always just see it as a side hustle? Did you ever take it super serious?
So I took it really seriously, but I was never really in the kind of like the upper sort of levels and everything. The other big thing was that so essentially like I was playing back in like the 2003 2004 when like Chris Moneymaker was on ESPN, and it was like the hot like new thing. There were just like a bunch of fish drowning. And I was playing then, and playing 1, 2, and 2, 4 tables on on Poker Stars and all of that stuff. It's funny because I'm ADD and I really struggle to focus on stuff. But when I find something that catches my attention, I can just focus on it 100% for hours. And poker was that thing for me when I was in high school, so I took it very seriously. But then when I got to college, it became quite unhealthy for me that too often my mood was dictated across my entire life by how I was doing at the tables, right? And that if I had a good day, then I'd be happy the rest of the day. And if I had a bad day, then I'd be miserable and snapping at people and stuff like that. And I just realized that it was sort of going too much that direction. And so I ended up taking a break from it. And then right around then was, I think, what was it called? Black Friday or whatever, when they sort of outlawed poker in the US. And so then it was the only people that were still online playing were the ones that were serious enough to have a VPN or to be international and playing. And so then it was all of a sudden, what was a 2-4 level that you'd make a bunch of money off of fish or whatever became the 50 cents, $1 level. And so then I just didn't enjoy it as much and all of that. But, it paid for beer money and fraternity, fees in college for a bit. But, I do credit it a lot, for a lot of my success, with ZenMaid and a lot of other areas of life. But I was never particularly good, made a little bit of money, but I was good compared to your average citizen. I was never really good compared to your average good poker player,
I hear you. And do you still feel the poker itch? You ever just want to jump back in, blow off a few $100, or it doesn't eat at you anymore?
No, I mean, what's funny is that I'd completely stopped. That I hadn't played for 7 or 8 years, and then last year I got married.
Congratulations, brother!
In Las Vegas,
yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I got married in Las Vegas of all places, and just had just a couple of days of just nonstop, just family, friends, and I was just completely out of it. And I actually went to one of the poker tables and just sat down, lost $40, but just enjoyed myself. I was listening to a book and just kind of playing my hands and everything, and that was literally my first time playing in 8 or 9 years. So yeah, it's probably more of a time thing. It's just more that I know it would be a huge time suck, and I just don't really want to get back into that. So but, I miss it sometimes.
I relate to certain parts of your story, and I think don't you think it's amazing where you can be hyper focused on a thing like poker, right? And then, oh, Black Friday hits. Okay, we'll find something else and just switch. Like, it might seem normal to you. Do people in your life have things to say about that? Like, how do you just and not think back on it? You know, when you're doing it, people are like, well, he's addicted, but you yourself know, well, no, it's just this is my thing. And then when I switch focus, I switch focus, right?
Yeah, it was kind of yeah, it's kind of funny. I don't really hang out with too many of like the poker like people like anymore. Like I can't remember the last time that I like talked about poker.
It's a real
like,
degenerate crowd. I don't
everyday
blame you.
life. It really is. It really is.
You don't want to make too many poker friends, okay? I mean, like,
yeah.
let's just leave it at that, you know? Like it's an underground world, you know. It's a weird place to be. Whether you're doing it live, actually worse, man. If you're going to trying to find live action, it's just like you're putting yourself in weird, dangerous situations depending on what home game or what casino you're playing at.
Yeah, exactly. It's and like the casinos where they like pump in like oxygen or whatever, and
Do
you
they
can just
really
sit
do
there
that,
and all
or
of a
is this
sudden
like
it's 4 in the morning.
Do they really do that at the casinos? Pump in oxygen to keep you. When they do
yeah,
that,
yeah.
no way.
Yeah. They definitely do. I mean, it's probably got to be like a specific level of casino, but they definitely do that. So, yeah. Good times. Like I said, it's shaped a lot of the stuff. It makes a lot of things in life just seem like a lot easier. That I feel like there's a lot of just like poker kind of like basics or almost like mental models that I use, of like expected value is a big one, right? Like, just putting your money in when you're ahead and like, I mean, honestly, the biggest one is not being results oriented, right? Of like, just because you lose a hand doesn't mean that you made like the wrong decision. And that's something that like way too many people don't understand. Like the number of times that like we run like a marketing campaign for ZenMaid and it falls flat in its face. And I've got like developer friends that have their own SaaS companies. And so they just think like developers and they just think that like, oh, like if you put in the code, then like you get this result and it's just like that simple. And they're like, that's all that marketing is. And you're like, no, like that's not marketing. Like marketing is not an exact science. You take bets, you take shots that you miss all the time. And sometimes you have to do 10 or 20 marketing campaigns. And the one that works is like, 100 times the results and stuff like that. So yeah, shapes a lot of my thinking.
I love that perspective, man. I definitely, I mean, I can align with that. Now, let me ask you this: where are you at with having someone or multiple people on your team that supplement you? Whereas, we were talking about earlier, where sometimes you have too much of a bias towards action. Are there people on your team, the more conservative ones? Is there a yin and the yang as far as founder, co-founder, or who on your team kind of helps bring you back or helps you see the other side of the coin?
Yeah, definitely. So right now, that's probably mainly like my wife. She leads our marketing now. So I mean, our team at ZenMaid is now like 25 people. So we've got like a pretty like big team at this at this point. It's a lot of people that are like part time, and then there's maybe 4 or 5 of us that pretty much like ZenMaid is just 100% like what we do. And so it's interesting because the company, particularly over time, it kind of goes through cycles of being very reflective of my weaknesses or very reflective of my strengths. And so right now we're kind of in like one of those positions where there's just a lot of moving parts. So when I decide that we're going to do something, it usually has to go through 3 levels of people to actually get done. And so that forces me to slow down a lot, right? And so yeah, I mean, but we definitely have a lot of kind of checks and balances like in place. And like a lot of times, I'm even asking myself, okay, what's the effort there? What's the opportunity cost? If I ask like the development team to do this, what does that mean that they're not doing in that time? And so a lot of it has been like self-growth, like on my part, but I still have a very strong bias to action, particularly when it's the kind of thing that either I can do 100% on my own, or I have access to like the resources within the team to get something done like within a day. I'm much less likely now though to be like, okay, we're going to spend the next 4 weeks working on this idea that I just had. If we do something like that, it's usually like, okay, we can get a proof of concept out in the next 24 hours and then we can see how it goes. And if it goes well, then we can put in more resources into it.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing that. Have you Have you read, and I only read this recently, but apparently Jeff Bezos has this 70% of information rule where if he considers that enough information to make a decision, meaning, we can never be 100% sure or have 100% of information before we take action. And I just read this article 4 to 6 weeks ago, and apparently he's lived by this for a long time, but I just read it in the article where Jeff Bezos says, okay, if I know 70% of the whatever issue, that's enough for me to say yay or nay or make a decision one way or another. I feel like that's kind of, you reminded me of Mr. Amazon over here, because your decision, in that like you don't require 100% information. And I feel like the very conservative guy is like, the Mr. Accountant is like, no, I don't want to do anything unless I know 100% how things are going to turn out. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one, I mean, yeah. So I've read a lot of stuff on Bezos. He's got a lot of very good, like mental models that can help a lot with decision making and sort of how to think about a lot of things. And I think Jeff Bezos is actually one of those, like, I put him up there with like Elon Musk and like Steve Jobs and some of those other entrepreneurs that just the way that they think about things is very like unique and impressive. But I feel like with Jeff Bezos, it's easier to emulate, that he's like much more sort of human in like his decision making. But what's funny is like what you just mentioned there, I credit that a lot more to poker than anything else. Is like I'm just used to like, in poker, it's always an incomplete information game, right? Like you never know what the other person has. And like the truth is like that's real life. And like I said, I have like developer, founder friends, and they want to be able to know what the ROI is going to be on some marketing campaign before it goes live, or they don't want to invest resources unless they know that it's going to work. And it's just like, dude, like that's not the way that it works. Like the only thing I know for sure is that if I take enough shots, something will work. Right. And like, that's pretty much it. So yeah, I don't know that I've actually heard that 70% one, but that makes a lot of sense. Like
Gotcha.
the other one that I like from Bezos is disagree and commit. Right. Is like when you go, like I don't think that that's the right marketing campaign to move forward with, but let's do it. And I think that's a really, really powerful one, because it stops, particularly in companies like ours, it stops like bureaucracy or like needing there to be like a democratic decision, which really bothers me. Is I hate it when you have to have everyone's buy-in, because when you have to have everyone's buy-in, you only take the safest shots. And like it's the big risks that you take, right? Or the things that are less likely to work that usually have the biggest impact on a company.
That's amazing. Now, kind of going off all that, I know you just kind of talked about a lot in just maybe one paragraph's worth of sentences, right? But is there any, or at least top two books you would recommend that kind of talks about the things, or where did you derive all this life and business wisdom from, or are you just kind of paraphrasing it from what you already know?
Well, so I'm mainly paraphrasing it from a lot of books and stuff that I've read. That I read a lot of books. I probably read 2 to 3 books a week, I would say.
Wow.
That I use Audible, so I just listen to like books on Audible at like 2.5 like speed and just go through them like really fast. I completely let go of like a lot of people try to read and they try to remember every single thing from the book, that they're used to it being almost like an academic way of reading. And I've just found that just most of the time, if I take a book that's about Jeff Bezos, I can listen to it. I can zone out of the book. I don't give a shit what year he was born. That doesn't matter to me, but I can take away some really big ideas about how he thinks about things. Right. So there's a couple really good books about mental models. I think it's called the Great Mental Models or something. Okay. There's a book by Shane Parrish, who runs Farnham Street, and he's written a lot about Jeff Bezos and Jeff Bezos's like mental models. Okay. So there's that one. There's the mental models book by I want to see it's Gabriel Weinberg or something. It's the dude that that's the founder of DuckDuckGo, the Google competitor.
Okay.
He wrote a book on mental models as well.
Okay.
There's Principles by Ray Dalio, which is a really great sort of like book that's about sort of how to think about like decisions in your life and then how to even turn them into like a process or like or a system. And then three biographies that I would recommend would be Jobs by Walter Isaacson, Musk by Ashley Vance, and I think it's One Click or The Everything Store. Those are two books that are both about Jeff Bezos and kind of the Amazon empire, and both of them are worth reading. Yeah, but yeah, I read a lot, obviously. I never did before, but now I do.
If we were running the book marathon, damn, bro, you'd be at the finish line, and I would have barely just started. But I'm gonna, if I can take anything from a page from your book, so to speak, is that to be less academic and more just be willing to listen to it at double speed just to get through the book. I think just kind of what the inability to take action, like literally if I just would start the book and be willing to just listen to it, I'd be making my way through so many books versus, if I wait until it's the perfect time to read, then no books will ever get read. So it's kind of finding that balance is like, do I want to read this like an academic book and take notes? All right, no more of that. I'm gonna take a page from yours and Peter's book. Peter's been pushing me to listen to all these audiobooks. I'm like, when can I do this? I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna do it like you guys and just listen, make background noise. If I pick up a lesson here and there, great. If I don't hear Bezos's birthday, who cares, right?
Well, because there's two things like there just like really quickly is so like. One thing is, so in terms of just like speeding it up, like you can, if you just start listening at one speed and then like take one of your favorite books from back in the day or a book that you already know is really good and then listen to that at 1.1 speed. And then for your next like new book,
so
listen to it at 1.1 speed. Yeah, you work your way up to it. Because like for me, like I listen at 2.5 speed and it's completely normal to me. Like I pick up on all the tonality that the author's using. Like to me, it just sounds completely normal. But a big thing, off of like what you were just saying is one of the problems that a lot of people struggle with, and it's where the bias towards action is so important, is that so many people are exactly like what you were just saying of like, it's like, oh, when am I going to have the time? Like if I'm going to read this book, I need to really sit down and like write it down. And for me, it was just like a kind of like a realism thing was that just at some point I was just like, you know what, like realistically, I don't read any of these books. I don't sit down. I don't read them. Like it never happens. I can keep telling myself that it's going to, I can keep trying to set aside time, but the truth is it never like ever happens. If it did, I wouldn't have read one book in the past 3 years. And so at some point it was just like, I'd rather get 80% of something than 100% of nothing. And so for me, I just listen to books because like that's better. And I have friends that are like, oh, but like you don't remember this detail. And I'm like, yeah, because that detail doesn't affect my life at all, right? Like I've got the big idea and I can now take it to like the next like decision that I make, but I can't tell you when he was born because like who gives a shit, right? Like no one cares. I can just Google that if I need that like that information. And then the last thing is that particularly when you speed the books up, one of the best things about it is that like I have a list of books to reread. So I go through so many books, but then I have a couple of books that I'm like, you know what, like that book was actually good enough that at some point I'm going to sit down and listen to it in more detail and pay attention to it because I know that there were a lot of great lessons that I can take from it. And then last thing, sorry, a bit of a tangent here, but like you guys have heard like the saying of no man crosses the same river twice, right? For the man is different and the river has changed. And I find it's the exact same thing with books. Is like I can reread Principles, which I've already read. This is my wife, by the way, right there. I can like I've already read Principles, I think 2 or 3 times, but every time that I read it, because I'm at a different place in my life, I take away different things from the book. And so in that sense, it's like, if you're just going to the gym, you can listen to music, or you can listen to a book. And there's
Oh my
nothing wrong with
God.
doing either.
Never
but that's
thought
what
of that.
do.
I never thought of
Yeah.
a book. Is my mind blown. I can't believe this. My biggest takeaway from, I don't know about the other young hustlers or whoever trying to get business advice from a founder, but for me, that's the biggest takeaway is how are these entrepreneurs that say they read 100 books a year, how are they doing it? This is the how. Like, I hear people brag about it like, oh great, okay, you read 2 books a week, great, but this is how it's done.
Yeah, I kind of think that most of them are lying, to be honest. I feel like I'm the only one that actually
Right.
actually does that. Cause, yeah, I don't know. I just, right now, at this point, it's I spend maybe 2 to 3 hours a day working, and then the rest of my day it's I'm going into the gym twice a day right now, mainly because I just have good books that I'm listening to. So I'm just I'll just go spend an hour pretending to lift weights, I'm just listening to my book the entire time. So,
Amar, I want you to hold me to that when we talk in 30 days. I want you to be like, what 1 or 2 books did you actually read, Omar, and just at least keep me accountable. Okay, it's about the accountability. I say I'm gonna do it. Don't let me end this recording and not actually do that.
and
okay?
not
Right. Well, let's, man, I've got a bunch of questions, but I mean, we're close to the hour, so I'm just going to move to some things that I was dying to ask you. If you've talked ZenMaid to death, I might ask you a couple additional questions, but before we talk about ZenMaid some more, what's a cause that you might be passionate about that may not be obvious to everybody that knows you, or even friends or family, or maybe it is to them, but the general public wouldn't know? What's if I gave you a megaphone, not that this podcast is a megaphone, but imagine I get as popular as Joe Rogan one day. What is the other message that you would want to shout to the world?
I don't actually know. I mean, it's probably just something of I feel like anyone that's listening to this, it's you can go out and create the life that that you want to, and it'll likely take you 3 to 5 times longer than you want it to. But I think the real the adage is everyone what is it? They overestimate what they can do in in a week or a month, but they underestimate what they can do in a year.
Wow.
And I think that's particularly true when it comes to fitness, for example, right? That I've been on a fitness journey for some time. It's taken so long, but now I'm beginning to actually see those results, and I look completely different than I did a year ago. When it comes to business, I think it's actually people completely overestimate what they can accomplish in a year, but completely underestimate what they can accomplish in 5 years. And I just think that if more people sort of had that mindset of just if you take enough shots, over time something will work, and it'll be completely worth it no matter how many times you fail up until that point. I just think the world would be a much better place,
I mean, great that you tie the business analogy into a fitness one that everybody can internally understand, right? That it's exactly the same, but the business is stretched out a little bit farther. So the 1 year in business is kind of similar to the 1 week or the 1 month in real life. That's amazing. I don't know if you just came up with that on the spot, but that's kind of a beautiful analogy right there. And no, I actually never heard the phrase "no man crosses the same river twice." I was nodding my head just to try to seem smart, but I had to write it down because I'm I get it, but I mean, dumb me, I haven't read the book that came from, or maybe I should have read it in high school, but.
I don't know where that one came from.
Yeah.
I have no idea. That's kind of the thing. It's sometimes you ask me a question, I give you an answer, and I'm where did that thought come from? I'm sure I read it somewhere.
Yeah.
It's just I read so many books, I can't credit it.
On that same note, I have to just guess that you have a strong intuition. That on the Myers-Briggs, you're an N, for intuition. I don't know if you've ever taken the Myers-Briggs. Do you know your personality type?
ENTP, I think.
Okay, no,
I think it might be ENTJ. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, the ENTP sounds right to me because I mean, there's a lot of difference between the last letter. It can mean a bunch of different things, but the P's are more of the more open to possibilities, the ones that are generating the ideas. But then also the J's are the ones that kind of take action. So it could be one or the other. The reason, so you might actually be a J because you're very much biased towards action versus inaction. But I know the N for sure because the intuitive types are the ones that just have that gut feeling. It could be logical. You could be drawing from like subconscious things or things you read 10 years ago, right? But sometimes the intuitives are good at just taking random concepts and smashing them together like you have just done in person. So I would hard say you're an intuitive. You can tell us you're an extrovert. So I don't know, like for me, I'm an introvert, but people might not get that when I'm on the podcast and I'm being a host. But so you shared that you're an extrovert, you identify as an extrovert. So I think there's a good case for ENTP, or based on what you've already said, ENTJ makes a lot more sense. Well,
it changes over time, right?
Course,
that I think as your personality changes and stuff like that. So I'm pretty sure that I've tested for both of those. So I don't know what it is now.
It's not an exact science. Also, you can't just box people in, but it's a good kind of starting ground for kind of relating with different people, at least.
It's certainly better than horoscopes.
Right. Well, I don't know. I don't like and I wanted to say, like, I just got engaged, so because I saw the ring on your finger. So it's so I wanted to say congratulations, not just the random one, but from a newly engaged guy to a guy that just got married.
Man.
That's
awesome.
Like congratulations for real, man. Like, I'm right behind you, brother. That's awesome. While we have a few minutes left, let me ask you, what is the most like meaningful marketing story? Leave it kind of open. What, like, along the path, what was something that like maybe like your company almost sunk and you brought it back from the brink, or what, some kind of meaningful marketing story, whatever that question means to you?
Yeah, well, so there's two things there. So like we had where we almost like we almost just completely blew up the company, that we launched like a big redesign that we'd spent $50,000-$60,000 on over like maybe a year, that we just invested a ton of resources into. And the actual relaunch of it, like the redesign itself was good, but the relaunch where we sort of took it from the old design to the new design was just a complete nightmare. We lost like 40% of our business over the following like maybe like 3 to 6 months. And so that was like a pretty big one, that when we made it through that, it was kind of like, if we can make it through this, then we can make it through anything. Learned a lot about communication and everything through that like it could have been a lot worse, but we actually like came through it quite like strong, of like, I was kind of like explaining and like publicly very much like, okay, like, we're working on it. We've made this mistake. Like, here's what we can do to help you, like, while the system is down and blah, blah, blah. And like, that was in stark contrast to one of our competitors that had a very similar situation that happened, and they essentially like locked down their Facebook group and stopped allowing people to post because everyone was bitching about how horribly they'd done this, and they just kind of went radio silent and then just kind of hoped that it would like blow over. So we had like that like situation. You'd asked about marketing specifically, and with that, and I'll keep this like short. Is so I think about marketing as marketing is any time that you're helping your audience and not asking for anything in return. So the fact that people can listen to this podcast for free is a form of marketing for you and Peter. Even if you guys have nothing to sell right now, if you guys do have something to sell in the future, then the podcast is a perfect marketing like channel or marketing kind of strategy, because you're delivering people value for free. And so for ZenMaid, our big one that really, really took off for us is we now run the Maid Summit. So if you go to maidsummit.com, we were the first ones to do a big virtual conference where we brought together 40 or 45 of like the biggest like consultants and coaches in the industry, and just personalities in the industry, to all give 30 to like, hour-long talks, and essentially just add a ton of value to the industry 100% for free. So anyone could join that. We charged for the replays after, but that was like a big one of like, that was when we like really, really nailed it, and we weren't sure that we were going to. We put in a lot of resources, like we thought that it would work really well, but I mean, we had 3,000 people, that registered for that, and we were just the talk of the industry for for a week. And so, yeah, that's probably the biggest like marketing thing that we've done.
Thank you for sharing. I did not think I was going to dig that gem out of you, man. I'm glad I asked some weird questions that I'm like, well, maybe he will or won't have an answer for that. man, you like hit a
Yeah.
grand slam for me. I'm like, well, maybe he won't have an answer, but that is an amazing answer, bro. Like, I think you're giving a lot of aspiring young hustlers some ideas for what they could potentially do for their own businesses. I'm thinking of some summit I could do for one of my side hustles. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How did that summit idea come about? And like what made you guys, like, how from start to finish, like what made you think it could or couldn't be a big hit? Just tying the whole podcast together. I mean, you probably didn't know the exact ROI, but you're like, let's take the shot.
Yeah. So, so because I really enjoy marketing, I've just always been like, marketing is pretty much what I wake up thinking about, that I'm always trying to figure out, like I find marketing fun, and I find a lot of the stuff that we do for the marketing is a lot of fun. That if you guys follow me like on Twitter, I posted about it a couple of weeks ago, but we got like, I don't know if you guys know Fiverr Jesus. Have you guys seen that dude? There's like,
I've been wanting to hire him
Fiverr.com.
actually. I don't know if it's the same one, but I was,
Yeah,
dude. Oh my God, I can't believe
it's
I was gonna hire that guy.
probably him. Yeah, it's probably him. We paid $22, and there's like a video online of him going like, "Hey, it's Jesus. We heard that you might think that I wouldn't endorse ZenMaid because of their Buddhist undertones, but like nothing could be further from the truth. Like I've seen every maid service software ever. ZenMaid's the best, right? And we got this like entire commercial we can't run it because like our audience is just like way too Christian and like
Really?
conservative and everything. So like we haven't like used it. But like those are the sort of like fun things that I do, that I just think of things like that. And I just spent a morning writing a script and then sending that over, and like everyone that I send that to is like, it's fucking brilliant. It's like best $22 that I've like ever like spent or whatever. But anyway, sorry, that was like a random tangent.
Oh man, I want to see that ad. Where can I go if I want to see the ad?
It's just go to twitter.com/itsjustamar. So ITSJUSTAMAR. That's like my Twitter handle, and it should be like near the top, because I just tweeted about that yesterday, so it'll be like near the top.
Man.
I'll send it to you guys like after.
Sure.
You can put it in like the show notes or whatnot.
Yeah.
But with the summit, it's one of those things where our industry is, I don't want to say like the industry is very behind, but like essentially there are two sort of groups that you can follow, particularly if you're in software, that essentially just kind of show you the future. And so if you look at like the indie hackers, or like the real kind of like startup space of the companies that are out there that are actually building like groundbreaking technology, or indie hackers that are building cool projects with the newest like programming languages out there, both of those will give you a lot of exposure to kind of like what's going to go mainstream in a couple of years. And then if you follow the internet marketing channels, then you can kind of see with internet marketing, you can see what's going to kind of become the big sort of like marketing things, usually a couple of years down the line. So in internet marketing, everyone was doing virtual summits back in 2015, 2016, to the point that most people just stopped taking them seriously. A lot of people like Gary Vee, for example, he won't speak on virtual summits anymore because he found them to just be a complete like waste of time. I think he's changed his mind on that during COVID, because they couldn't do actual like conferences and stuff. But that was big in 2015, 2016. Well, the whole thing is like our industry was definitely not ready for that. That just like from a technological perspective, it would have been a huge nightmare to try to get people to actually log on to the right site at the right time, and like all of this stuff would have just been a whole like nightmare. So I actually knew back in 2015, 2016 that okay, at some point in the next couple of years, the timing is going to be right for us to try this.
Gotcha.
And and so we decided that like in 2018, that was when we ran it for the first time. 2019 was the first one. And so yeah, like in 2019, it was that like a software company had come along and had made it so that so that you could run your own summit without having to deal with every little piece. That you essentially dealt with the speakers, you dealt with like actually getting the attendees, but then you just had to upload the videos and it would kind of send all the emails, do all of the communications, all of that stuff. And so as soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, now we can try a summit without having to put in like 8 months of effort to get all of these things right. And as soon as I saw that we could actually test out the idea with considerably less of an investment, that was when we decided to pull the trigger on it and everything. And yeah, I mean, we just looked at it that, like I'd mentioned at the beginning of the podcast of like, worst case scenario planning, is we just looked at it and we were like, the worst case scenario is only like 100 people are on here. And, there are some things we can do to make sure that they get some really good value out of it, but the upside is massive. And so it turned out, the upside was way more than we could have ever like hoped for.
Well, that's an awesome story, man. Why don't we wrap it up by giving you a chance to tell us, where ZenMaid is at now versus when you first started, and maybe some things in the pipeline that you're working on, or what, like kind of the evolution of ZenMaid up until now, and what you want to see it be in the future.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll just drop on a couple like links or whatever.
Sure.
So ZenMaid, we started out, took us like 3 years to get to, I think it was like 10K a month. It took us like, 38 months or something to get there, which is like, it sounds like a lot of money, but not when you're running a business. We're making 10K a month, and I was paying myself $1,000 like a month out of the 10K that we were making. And so, we just broke like $1 million. So like right now we're making about 90K a month. And it's like really beginning to scale that, whenever we like add more money, it's pretty much going to the bottom line at this point. So that's like really nice. And the goal is to really just to keep scaling it, that like I love what I do every day. I love the strategy that I get to think about and stuff. I wake up like I wouldn't say I wake up like excited for work, but I wake up excited for life. And I think that that's something that like, I feel like I'd feel kind of aimless if we like sold the company right now. But at some point, maybe we'll look into that. Maybe we'll just sort of like leave it, or not like leave it, but like maybe I'll hire a CEO to come in and to take my position so that I can kind of focus on the next thing. And, right now it's like I said, I'm on like my own sort of like fitness journey now. And, helping like support the wife with her stuff that she's working for ZenMaid and does a lot of like our marketing stuff, but she's very passionate, about, sort of leading like a more like ethical, sustainable life of like, finding ways to like recycle plastic and stuff like that. And so I'm trying to like help her with her sort of like journey there. And then, starting to write a little bit, starting to do more podcasts like this one, just sort of, trying to help other people, put myself out there a little bit more. Gotten quite active on Twitter. I'd mentioned that like a minute ago, that like Twitter has become like my new just like favorite place to like to be and everything. And I mean, you guys can check that out. It's just Amar, or my personal website is theamaricandream.com.
The Amarican Dream. I love it, bro.
Yeah.
Well, send me those links so I make sure I put them right in the description.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I used to have the United States of America.com, and my wife decided that was like too douchey, that she literally was like, all right, for your birthday, I'm going to build you a new site. Like, also, I bought you a new domain.
Oh my God, man. You're giving me some ideas. Oh man. Okay. Well, I guess I did this kind of reverse. I guess for the last minute, I think it's because your business is like, your business model is so clear. I don't have to ask, but I can assume. But why don't you tell us, who is ZenMaid perfect for, and where does it stop? Like, I'm guessing, the one-off, one person made guy, and then, the guy running a 4 or 5 maid operation. Like what's the perfect owner or client that you're looking for?
Yeah, so the perfect owner or client is going to have like our perfect client is like anywhere from 3 to 8 cleaners. We tend to not be as like good for the really small people. That if they're like solo, then that will cause well, yeah, I mean it's just a little bit different.
Gotcha.
And then but we work with anyone like up to, you know, I mean, I think our biggest client has like 80 or 85 cleaners, but I
Okay.
would say
Wow.
probably like anywhere like 3 to 15 is pretty much like our target. But we can work with anywhere from like 3 to like 25 cleaners. But the main thing is like they have to be looking to scale the business. They have to be thinking about the business like a business owner. Is if
Gotcha.
someone is just like a solo cleaner that just wants to have like, you know, 5 houses a week that they clean and it pays their bills, they're not going to be the right fit for ZenMaid.
Gotcha. Well, that is very eye-opening. And so you're saying maybe not the best fit for just the one-off, but you have to have plans to be scaling up. And who wouldn't be, right? If you're trying to run a cleaning business, right? Why would you want to just be the person? You want to be the person scheduling the other people, right?
Well, that's the thing is like I think that for people like you and me, that seems like what it is. But there's a lot of people out there that are just like, I don't want to manage other people. I don't want to be responsible for other people. And for them, you know, if they can just work on their own, have a couple loyal clients that pay enough to cover their bills, to them, that's a very like simple life. And, you know, in a lot of ways, like, you know, I know a couple people in our industry, they don't use ZenMaid, but they're very successful in their own right. And they've just found a way that over time they've built up a brand. So like there's one guy that I follow that like he personally does all of like his cleaning, and he charges like maybe like $70 an hour, and it's
Wow.
just for his like labor time or whatever. And he's got I think 5 kids or something. He like controls his own schedule. He's off work at like 2:30 or 3 every day, spends a bunch of time, like, you know, I follow him like on Facebook and stuff. He's like an amazing dad, an amazing father, and he's just built this little business that just fits his lifestyle perfectly. So, you know, like I think there's like two sides to every story. There's two ways of, or like multiple ways of going about like everything. Personally, to me, that sounds terrible.
Yeah.
But for him, it works really well, and like more power to him.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for your time, Amar. And we're going to put all his links if you want to follow Amar, if you want to check out that video with the Jesus, which I am. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you for being our guest today, Amar Ghose, founder of ZenMaid.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Bye.